and welcome back to the podcast. This is Laws versus Laws. I'm Catherine.
I'm Lincoln.
Last week, we left off
On such a cliffhanger.
such a cliffhanger.
We were going in to the fear of laws and what that is.
Yes. And I think it's very interesting. We can bring up many historical cases, even though there's no historical precedent for necessarily like this exact like AI soldiers. There is that innate fear of the unknown goes back so far and is so universal to humans across time. One such case is the Luddites in the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
They were manufacturers and they worked in factories of clothing. But then when the machines came out that made the clothing so much faster, they realized that their jobs were going to be gone. And so they started smashing the machines with hammers in protest. And now the word is used mostly for people who just don't use any technology and are afraid of it. But I think it's very interesting that in the historical case where the word comes from, it wasn't people who just like swear it off and like, I'm like scared of this unknown thing. It was the people who knew what it was going to do. And that shifts to today where one of the leading people in AI is Elon Musk. And he is the one that advocates the most for AI regulation.
Yes, because he's afraid of what it can do. And as we should be, because we've all seen every other AI movie, robot taking over. And that could be a possibility if we let it get far. So the fear is, how do we regulate it without creating that fear?
And how do we regulate it without bowing to that fear and letting that fear control us so that we can still have innovation, but we also protect ourselves? That, finding that balance and that moderation is the hardest thing to do in anything, especially in politics. And especially in cases like this where there's no specific precedent.
Yes. That's a very good point. And we also have to think about is how people will respond to no matter what we do. Because people will always have different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what. That is a fact of human life. We cannot control people's opinions. And we have our own opinions about this.
I certainly do.
Yes. We're very two different people. Yeah. But we have to think what is the best impact for the course of humanity right now. And that might be just letting people have development of this technology and then seeing what it goes to show the fear that we need to take this seriously.
But is it better to be proactive or reactive? Because that is what you're proposing. You're proposing that we be reactive to the problem.
Yes, but it's such an unknown fear. Because what will this technology bring if we use it? I mean, we've already seen a little bit of examples with it being used with Russia right now attacking Ukraine and having those drone strikes. That is just having a little bit of the autonomy of it because they give out the order and then they go.
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, what is too far?
Yes. And I don't know, it's just such a hard thing because when you look at it like that, it's so in between and you don't really know where it's going to go because is it going to progress in a manner that is safe, and are the coders and the people making the technology going to ensure that? And do we trust them to ensure that, or do we have to make laws for the laws?
Yes. Well, I think we need to have some laws. We can't have just unreign chaos.
Mm-hmm.
We are not going into the purge right now. We need to have this controlled, but where do we go? How do we get people to take this seriously, and how do we know how to take it serious enough?
Yes.
Which is why
without taking it too seriously.
Yeah. Which is why it's such a problem for the UN or other political parties to figure out what to do with it because of finding that right balance. And how do you do that?
Yes, but at the same time, a lot of people are just like, well, just leave it alone, let's be reactive. But I'm personally against that because if you bring a newborn baby in, or a baby that's crawling around the house, sure, it might not go down the stairs, but what if it does?
Yeah.
that baby can fall down the stairs, or you can be proactive and put a baby gate, put a barrier there to protect people that don't know better.
Yes. And like, it's such an interesting situation because because of that fear that leads us to do something. And if you do something beforehand, how do you know it's enough to prevent it? And if you don't do anything, what consequences will come? Both ways there's consequences, but what ones will have the better effects in the long run?
True. And does effort is effort taken into account? Like, if you try and be proactive, even if it doesn't end up working, do you get credit?
Well, I think you should get at least some effort, but it depends on what has been done before you, I guess, to try to limit the problem. And is it enough effort to solve the situation? So I guess the answer is it depends, and it's a dumb answer, but it is what it is right now.
It's such an up in the air thing, especially for us, because we're just two teenagers trying to figure out an answer to something that's a lot bigger than either of us.
Yes.
But when you bring it back to, these are things going in, these robots are going in instead of human lives. If they are lost, a human life is not lost.
Yes.
And it is sad, and it is money that we spent to make them, and effort that we put in to regulate and create. But at the end of the day, is the human life more important?
Yeah.
Or the robots?
Yes, and I think just looking at it, well, we can throw in some numbers out there. It cost the Pentagon for each Afghanistan soldier around $850,000 per year, whereas one of the robots that we could see coming up shortly only costs around $280,000. So we can have around 3 more robots on the field compared to soldiers, and which would do a lot. The military advantage on that, having more people in the field, is incredible. But how do you make sure that it just doesn't become a bunch of political games with having the fact of removing that political or human element?
And when you remove that human element, and it becomes eventually the other side copying you because they're so much more efficient, when does it become that it's just two robots fighting each other and pointless, like, warfare and destruction between robots fighting each other and people basically playing a video game back in their own country?
Yes.
Controlling and piloting them. And at that point, wouldn't it just be better to, like, do a competition like is proposed in All Quiet on the Western Front?
Yes.
If you haven't read that book, they propose that instead of everyone going out and fighting, like, the government's leaders or 2 representatives go in a boxing ring, and then everyone can watch and buy tickets, and it can be a grand old time, and then it doesn't affect the economics.
Yes, which I think is such a huge factor here, because either way the economy will be affected, but also we'll see this current trend of anti-war, which is so high with how many wars are going on right now. I think it will start to be increased with the politicians because of the fact that there's not a human element of it, and you're just throwing money at the problem. And that money, of course, just comes from the taxpayers of the country.
Yes, but at that point, there would still be casualties of the war.
Mm-hmm.
There would still be casualties, but they wouldn't be military casualties anymore. They would be civilian casualties. And
civilian casualties and your checkbook casualty with how much you would have to pay to keep them going.
Mm-hmm. And, like, it's just resources upon resources to build and create these things that aren't contributing anything. They're just fighting other robots. So both countries are draining resources on robots that essentially cause more damage.
Yes.
They only cause more damage. They fight other robots eventually. And, like, nothing is happening. You're just destroying the land and the civilians around wherever this war is taking place.
Yeah, so where's the limit? how far can we go without draining all our resources?
Or is it better to not do it at all?
Well, we don't know, so it's up to you. And that, my friends, is the end of this.